On a January afternoon in 1977, inside the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, one of the most feared pass rushers in football walked onto the field ready to wreck a Super Bowl. His name was Jim Marshall. 4 quarters later, the stat sheet next to his name told a strange story. 0 tackles, 0 sacks, 0 assists. A defensive end built to destroy quarterbacks had been completely shut down, and almost nobody outside Oakland knew the name of the man who did it to him. He wore number 78. He never sacked a quarterback. He never scored a touchdown. He never appeared on a single highlight reel. Casual fans remember today. But without him, the Raiders you think you know, the swagger, the deep passing game, the championships, none of it happens the way it did. His name was Art Shell. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand something the Raiders organization has never fully solved. How do you replace a man who wasn't just a great player, but the wall an entire dynasty was built behind? Because what Shell did off the field, years after that Super Bowl, is even harder to believe than anything he did wearing a helmet. To understand why Shell mattered this much, you have to go back to where he came from. Not a football field. The segregated streets of Charleston, South Carolina. Arthur Lee Shell Jr. was born on November 26, 1946. He grew up in a country that told him, through its laws and its daily life, that he was less than equal. He attended Bonds Wilson High School, a school built for black students, inside a system designed to keep people separated. Coaches James Fields and Eugene Gray noticed him early, not just his size, his discipline. Being big never automatically makes a dominant athlete. Shell had to earn it. He picked up all-state honors in both football and basketball. Proof that his gifts weren't only physical, they were mental too. He processed the game, he studied it. Charleston in the 1950s and 1960s was not an easy place to be a young black athlete with big dreams. Doors that opened easily for other kids stayed shut for Shell, no matter how talented he was. He didn't have the luxury of assuming hard work would automatically be rewarded. He learned early that he would have to be better than good just to get a fair look. That lesson never left him. Here's the part most highlight reels skip. Recruiters from the country's biggest programs weren't exactly racing to sign him. Segregation limited where a black athlete from South Carolina could even play college football in the 1960s. So Shell enrolled at Maryland State College, a small historically black school that would later become the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Nobody outside that campus expected a future Hall of Famer to walk through those doors. That was about to change, one snap at a time. At Maryland State, Shell didn't just play one side of the ball. He lined up at offensive tackle and defensive tackle, a rare kind of two-way dominance most players simply cannot survive physically. He helped clear running lanes for a halfback named Emerson Boozer, a player so talented he would later earn his own bust in the College Football Hall of Fame. In 1967, Shell was named a Little All-American. 3 straight years, he earned first-team All-CA honors, the top individual recognition in his conference. Under his blocking, Maryland State compiled a record of 20 wins, 8 losses, and 1 tie across his 4 seasons. He was dominant on that field. But dominant at a small black college in the 1960s did not guarantee a single NFL scout would notice. Talented players from schools like his were overlooked constantly, no matter how many games they controlled. Shell had every reason to believe pro football might simply pass him by. It didn't pass him by, but it didn't come running either. This was actually a common story in that era. Historically black colleges across the South and the Mid-Atlantic were producing NFL-caliber talent every single season, and most of the league simply wasn't paying attention. A handful of teams, including the Raiders, understood something the rest of the league hadn't figured out yet. Some of the best players in football were sitting in plain sight. At schools nobody bothered to scout closely. In 1968, the Oakland Raiders selected Art Shell in the 3rd round of the AFL draft, the 80th overall pick. At the time, the AFL and NFL were still 2 separate leagues, only a couple years away from a full merger, both scrambling to find talent nobody else had discovered yet. For Oakland, Shell was exactly that kind of discovery, not a headline selection, not a guaranteed roster spot. Just a chance. For most rookies from small programs, that chance quietly slips away within a season or 2. Shell had other plans. He spent his first 2 years in the league grinding through special teams, the unglamorous work almost no fan ever notices. No spotlight. No glory. Just full-speed collisions on kickoff coverage, week after week, proving he belonged before anyone handed him anything. By his 3rd season, everything changed. Shell won the starting left tackle job, and once he had it, he never let it go again. What happened next turned a special teams grinder into one of the most feared offensive linemen the league had ever produced. Shell lined up next to a young guard named Gene Upshaw, and together, they became something the NFL hadn't quite seen before. Two men, shoulder to shoulder on the left side of the Raiders' offensive line, forming a barrier that opposing defensive coordinators simply could not solve. Shell stood 6'5" and weighed 265 pounds, but his size wasn't the scary part. It was his footwork. It was his patience. Pass rushers attacked him with speed, with power, with every trick in the book, and Shell would absorb it, redirect it, and shut the play down without wasted motion. This mattered enormously for one simple reason. The Raiders of the 1970s built their entire identity around throwing the ball deep. Under coach John Madden, quarterback Ken Stabler needed time in the pocket to find receivers like Fred Biletnikoff and Cliff Branch streaking down the field. That time had to come from somewhere. It came from the left tackle standing between Stabler and every defender trying to end the play early. This fit perfectly inside the culture Al Davis had built. The Raiders of that era wore black like a warning. Their motto was simple: commitment to excellence. And it wasn't just a slogan on a wall. Davis built his roster out of players other franchises had given up on: misfits, late-round picks, and small school prospects nobody else wanted to gamble on. Shell fit that mold perfectly, and he became proof that the gamble worked. From 1973 through 1978, Shell earned All-Pro recognition 6 years in a row. Across his career, he was selected to 8 Pro Bowls. Coaches, rival players, and sports writers all started repeating a version of the same idea. Shell wasn't just protecting a quarterback's blind side. He was protecting the entire Raiders' offensive philosophy, the vertical passing attack that made Oakland must-watch football for an entire decade. But statistics and honors weren't what made him legendary inside the locker room. It was what he did on the biggest stage in sports. January 9, 1977, Super Bowl XI, the Oakland Raiders against the Minnesota Vikings. Across from Shell stood Jim Marshall, a defensive end with a reputation for wrecking backfields and changing games single-handedly. This was the matchup NFL insiders quietly circled before kickoff. Stabler needed every second Shell could buy him that day, dropping back to throw against a Vikings defense built to get after the quarterback. For 4 full quarters, Shell didn't just block Marshall, he erased him from the game. Marshall finished that Super Bowl with 0 tackles, 0 sacks, and 0 assists. A player known league-wide for taking games over got shut down so completely that football historians still point to that performance as one of the greatest individual efforts in Super Bowl history. The Raiders won that game 32-14, claiming the franchise's first Super Bowl title. 4 years later, Shell helped the Raiders capture a second championship, defeating the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl XV. 2 rings, one reputation that would never fade from anyone who watched him play. What made Shell even more remarkable was how he showed up, over and over, for 15 straight seasons. He played 156 consecutive games before an injury finally forced him out of the lineup. An almost unheard-of streak for a lineman absorbing violent hits from 300-pound defenders on nearly every single snap. The moment he recovered, he built another streak, 51 straight games this time. Across his career, Shell appeared in 207 regular season games with 169 starts, numbers that still rank among the highest in franchise history. He played in 23 postseason games, including 8 AFL and AFC championship appearances. This wasn't a player who flashed greatness occasionally. This was a player who showed up, prepared, every single week for a decade and a half, and refused to let his teammates down. Quarterbacks trust their blind side to somebody. And for 15 years, Oakland's quarterbacks never had to think twice about who that somebody was. By 1982, Shell decided it was time to walk away as a player. But his story with the Raiders, and with football history, was only getting started. Shell didn't actually leave the game. He simply moved to the other side of it. In 1983, he became the Raiders' offensive line coach, teaching young linemen the same footwork, patience, and discipline that had made him nearly impossible to beat for 15 years. Along the way, he studied everyone he worked under. From John Madden, he learned how to read people. From Tom Flores, he learned patience. From Mike Shanahan, he learned organization. For 6 seasons, Shell absorbed all of it quietly, away from the spotlight. Then, in October of 1989, everything changed. Not just for Shell, for the entire history of the National Football League. The Raiders had started that season 1-3 under head coach Mike Shanahan. Owner Al Davis made a call that would echo far beyond one disappointing stretch of football. On October 3, 1989, he removed Shanahan and named Art Shell the new head coach of the Los Angeles Raiders. To understand why this mattered so much, hold on to one number: 64. That's how many years had passed since a black man last served as a head coach in professional football. Fritz Pollard held that role back in the 1920s, in football's roughest, earliest days. After him, that door simply closed. For over 6 decades, not a single black coach was trusted with the keys to a professional football team. Shell walked through that door in 1989. He became the first black head coach of the modern NFL era. Not everyone believed he could pull it off. Local newspapers openly questioned whether he was being set up to fail, inheriting a struggling roster with a fan base already losing patience. Shell answered with results instead of arguments. The Raiders went 7-5 the rest of that season, finishing 8-8, and pulling a team that looked ready to collapse back onto solid ground. Think about what taking that job actually meant in real terms. Every Sunday, cameras pointed at him differently than they pointed at any other coach in the league. Every decision he made carried weight no other coach had to think about. He wasn't simply coaching a football team. He was proving, in real time, in front of an entire country still working through its own prejudices, that the color of a coach's skin had absolutely nothing to do with his ability to lead men and win football games. There was no blueprint for what Shell was doing. No coach who looked like him had walked this path in over 60 years, which meant there was nobody to call for advice on how to handle any of it. Every mistake would get magnified. Every win would get scrutinized for a different reason than it would for anyone else on the sideline. He carried that weight quietly, the same way he used to absorb a pass rusher's best move without flinching. That kind of pressure could have crushed a lesser man. Instead, Shell delivered. In 1990, his first full season as head coach, the Raiders went 12-4, won their division, and advanced all the way to the AFC Championship game. Shell was named the AFC's Coach of the Year. Pro Football Weekly handed him their own Coach of the Year honor as well. That same season, he received the Greasy Neal Award, one of coaching's most respected recognitions. He wasn't just breaking a barrier, he was excelling on the other side of it, immediately, under more scrutiny than almost any coach before him had ever faced. And he wasn't finished opening doors. Within a few years, coaches like Dennis Green got their own opportunities. And a generation later, names like Tony Dungy and Mike Tomlin would build championship careers standing on ground Shell cleared first. Shell led the Raiders through the 1994 season, finishing with a winning record and cementing his place as one of the most respected leaders in franchise history. But football, like life, rarely moves in a straight line upward. In 2006, more than a decade after he first left the sideline, the Raiders called Shell back. Al Davis believed the same discipline that built champions in the 1970s could rebuild a franchise that had lost its way. It did not unfold the way anyone hoped. That season, the Raiders finished 2 wins and 14 losses, the worst record the franchise had posted since 1963. The offense could never find rhythm, even with one of the league's stronger defenses playing alongside it. Tension, with star receiver Jerry Porter, only made a difficult year harder. On January 4, 2007, Shell resigned. It would have been easy for that single season to define his coaching legacy. It didn't. Because by then, Art Shell had already secured a place in football history that one difficult year could never erase. Legacies built over decades don't disappear because of 12 rough losses. His already stood on far too much solid ground for that. In 1989, the very same year he made history as a head coach, Shell was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He stood in Canton, Ohio, and received his gold jacket, the ultimate recognition for a career built on quiet, relentless excellence. The honors kept arriving. Shell was named to the NFL's All-Decade Team for the 1970s. In 1999, the Sporting News ranked him 55th on their list of the 100 greatest football players in history. In 2013, he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, honoring the foundation he built at Maryland State before the NFL ever came calling. And in 2019, when the league celebrated its 100th season, Shell was named to the NFL's 100th anniversary all-time team, one of the rarest honors a former player can ever receive. Stop and look at what that full list actually represents. A kid from a segregated high school in South Carolina. A two-way lineman from a small college most scouts never bothered to visit. A third-round pick who spent 2 seasons on special teams before anyone trusted him with a starting job. Every single obstacle that should have kept him invisible instead became part of the resume that made him unforgettable. That same man became one of the greatest offensive linemen the NFL has ever seen. and the man who reopened a door the league had kept shut for 64 years. So why is Art Shell the one Raider this franchise could never truly replace? Look at the players who came after him. Marcus Allen brought electricity to the backfield. Tim Brown brought elegance to the wide receiver position. Ken Stabler brought swagger under center. The Raiders have never been short on legends, but none of them did what Shell did. He didn't just protect a quarterback's blind side for 15 straight years, building the foundation that let Oakland's vertical passing attack terrify defensive coordinators across the league. He didn't just anchor 2 Super Bowl championship teams with a level of week-to-week consistency almost no offensive lineman in history has matched. He also became the answer to a question the entire NFL had been avoiding for 64 years. Can a black man lead a professional football team at the highest level? Shell didn't just answer that question with words. He answered it with a division title, a Coach of the Year award, and a trip to the AFC Championship game in his very first full season on the job. And here's what makes it even bigger. Shell wasn't an isolated exception inside this organization. He was part of a pattern. Owner Al Davis had already made Tom Flores the league's first Hispanic head coach back in 1979, a coach who went on to win 2 Super Bowls in Oakland and Los Angeles. Davis would later make Amy Trask the first female chief executive in NFL history. This was a franchise that refused, on principle, to even play games in cities that forced black and white players into separate hotels. Breaking barriers wasn't an accident with this organization. It was the culture Shell walked into, and the culture he helped define for everyone who came after him. No other player in Raiders history carries both of Shell's legacies at once. The dominant, durable, championship-caliber lineman, and the trailblazer who reshaped what the league's coaching ranks could look like for every generation after him. The Raiders have replaced great players before, and they will again. They have never replaced what Art Shell represented, on the field and far beyond it. That's not just a statistic buried in a record book. That's not just a plaque hanging in canon. That's a legacy the silver and black will never be able to duplicate, no matter how many great players ever wear that uniform again. Every franchise likes to say it values toughness, loyalty, and doing the job nobody notices. Art Shell didn't just represent those values. He lived them for 4 decades, first as the lineman nobody saw on the highlight reel, and later as the coach who made history simply by being given the chance he had already earned. That's why his number and his name still carry a different kind of weight inside that organization, decades after he last suited up. Most players get remembered for one thing: a catch, a run, a highlight that loops forever online. Art Shell got remembered for something much harder to capture in a single clip, being the foundation nobody could see and the door nobody else had been strong enough to open. If this story taught you something about Raiders history you never knew before, stay close. There are more stories like this one coming, stories about the players who didn't just wear the uniform, but quietly built the entire identity of a franchise from the ground up.